without even knowing that they're being that way. And this removal of our history from the collective consciousness is really an integral part of the control grid, because really that's what it's all about, is control. And just returning to the opening quote for a few minutes, indifference and apathy truly are two of the biggest problems we face in the world today, and two of the things that have allowed the system to reach the point of control that it's come to. The issue being that people in the modern world don't really involve themselves in their lives, apart from going out and working and collecting their slave dollars. Most people put more of a focus on their virtual lives than on their real lives. They're more interested in getting likes on Snapchat or Instagram, getting followers on Facebook, than on paying attention to what is happening in the world around them, because that's just all boring news. You don't want to watch the TV, it's just all depressing, and we don't want to hear about wars and all that stuff. Not part of my reality. And that's the way people kind of get through it and don't find themselves overpowered by all the negativity that we see in the world today. It's kind of like some sort of inbuilt defense mechanism that people have. Some sort of means of self-preservation, and the only way they're able to deal with the insanity. But even in that, it's really important that people involve themselves in their lives, and it's very important that people involve themselves in the world. As once said by Plato, the price men pay for indifference to public affairs is to be ruled by evil men, and that is certainly apparent in the world today. There is far too much indifference in the world today. A lot of it, I would think, is coming from the rise of the technological world that we're seeing around us, the rise of this digital dystopia where everybody's locked into their smartphones and no one's really paying attention too much to what's going on around them. This really does create a kind of indifference by default in people, because they're always too busy doing other things. And it really is one of the main obstacles that we need to overcome as a species if we're ever going to get ourselves out of this mess that we're in. And even looking at that, one of the most interesting things about it is the fact that what people are so busy doing most of the time is nothing. Because the other things that people are doing most of the time is, in fact, staring at their smartphones, doing nothing. All they're doing is getting mental input, mental stimulation, but they're not actually doing anything except staring at this little device in their hand. I mean, they may be using their thumbs, but they're not interacting with the world. They're interacting with the virtual world, which is a world made up of zeros and ones and no actual physical content, and for all intents and purposes does not actually exist. And another really fascinating thing about the virtual world is that what you see in the virtual world are essentially simulations of that which exists in the real world. And the more realistic the simulations are, the more people enjoy the virtual world. And yet while they're doing that, they're missing out on the real world around them because they're locked into this little device in their hands. And all of the stuff they're looking at doesn't exist. They're missing out on existence for looking at a nicer digital version of that existence, which doesn't actually exist. It's very, very bizarre when you think about it. And of course, the reason people are so locked into this world is because of the dopamine addiction that they are suffering because of the way these devices have been set up. You know, every time you click an icon, every time you do something on your smartphone, every time you click something, every time you get a like, all of these things release dopamine into your body. And we have a society that is now suffering from mass dopamine addiction, most especially among the youth of today. And it's true, folks, it's what causes this addiction to technology. And for the most part, people are caught up in a situation where they're measuring their life and their whole existence by the amount of pleasure they're able to receive at any given moment, which renders them into a state of indifference towards the real world around them. And to me, I don't know, I just find it a weird thing, this fascination people have with the tech. And often when I say this sort of stuff, people say, yeah, but here we are watching this stuff on our smartphones. Max, if we threw away our smartphones, we'd never get to watch your show. And I just don't understand this, because I do the shows and I watch all these other shows, but I don't have a smartphone. I do it all on my computer at home. That's the thing, you've got all the stuff at home to be able to do this. And you can still do all the things that you are doing online now by doing it on your computer. I mean, all I'm suggesting is that when you go out into the real world, you leave the tech behind and you go out and actually experience the real world and experience real people as themselves. Not people that are sitting there staring at these screens. I mean, you don't need to take the virtual world out with you into the real world. You can leave the virtual world at home and participate in the real world. That would make a huge difference if people were to do that. Because all you're doing really is you're taking this surveillance device and this tracking device with you everywhere, and people are often forgetting their life skills or even forgetting how to find their way around their own towns without a GPS. It's ridiculous. And that's the problem, folks, is that people are taking the tech with them everywhere they go, and they're using the tech to involve themselves in real-world activities, such as shopping at supermarkets and checking into hotels and all of this sort of stuff that they're using their tech for when they never used to. You used to just sign forms and go and pay cash and do all this sort of stuff, and you could still do that. Of course, people say, well, this is the way they do it. If I didn't take my smart device, I wouldn't be able to use these places. Well, fine, don't use them. Go somewhere else. If you stop doing that, if you stop using them, then they'll stop using the tech because they won't have a choice. The only reason that they're all changing it all over to digital is because people carry their smartphones around with them everywhere and they let their smartphones run their lives for them. As I said, they just become indifferent to everything. Click a few buttons and the job's done. Click a few buttons and you find your way here. Click a few buttons and this happens and that happens. You don't have to think for yourself. The phone does it all for you. I mean, really, it's about a loss of life skills and it's about control, and ultimately it's about surveillance. And this is how it's done, folks, and this is why the control grid is able to perpetuate the way it does, is why it's able to continue, because people simply don't notice it because they're too distracted doing other things. But like I said, the other things they're doing are virtually nothing. And the real world is going through some drastic changes around them. Indeed, it's gone through some drastic changes already. We've certainly seen some changes in California this year. My heart really does go out to the people in California who are suffering the fires as well. Notice how every fire they've had in California in the last 2 years has been the worst fire in California's history, and it just keeps getting worse and worse, and it's all part and parcel with the same thing, folks. Very coincidentally, of course, the location of all of the fires that we've seen in California in the last 2 years just happen to all follow the path of the new high-speed train that they want to put in between San Francisco and Los Angeles, all of which is being run by Senator Feinstein's husband. Billion-dollar contract, set to make a lot of money on that one, folks. And these are very interesting fires. Again, the fires we saw in Malibu are a particular type of forest fire which turns houses into uniform piles of white ash, but somehow seems to not burn the forest or the trees. This is all active denial. This is all directed energy weapons, ladies and gentlemen, and it's simply a taste of what is to come. And looking even deeper at this control grid, looking deeper at the 5G grid, you've got to ask yourself whether what is really being set up is not a kill grid, because it could well be used for that. And you think about it, folks, if they've flooded the world, if they've done all this stuff, brought all these children, all these foundlings, created this whole new culture, this whole new society, they built it up to a certain point, and if they needed to wipe the people out, well, this would be a perfect way to do it. You get people enslaved to this monetary system which limits their potential, causes a barrier to be erected between them and reality, a barrier of scarcity whereby they've got to collect paper in order to pay to be alive. Gradually lead them into this digital system, lead it to a point where they've got to carry this device around with them in order to perform everyday functions. This device gives you the ability to be able to track everybody, locate anybody at any given time, record any conversation everybody's having, literally surveil every aspect of everybody's lives. And if you really needed to, if the situation got to a point where you were found out, you could simply switch the whole system over to active denial and fry them. Now, this whole 5G grid they're setting up, the electromagnetic system they're setting up, you've got to wonder exactly what can be done with this. I mean, we know it's going to be used for communication. We know they can target individuals specifically for active denial. But what else can they do with it? Could it somehow be hooked up with HAARP? Could it somehow be hooked up to send out a pulse to cause an earthquake? Could it somehow be used as a means to create an electromagnetic pulse that would liquefy the soil and create a mud flood? I mean, did they do this last time? Who knows how they did it, folks, but there is certainly a lot more to this 5G grid than meets the eye. And as I've been pointing out, there's also certainly a lot more to history than meets the eye. I'm of the opinion that all of the wars that we hear about that were fought in the past, as I've said before, I think they were all fought contemporaneously. The Napoleonic War, the War of Genghis Khan, the War of Troy. All of these wars were actually the war for Tartaria. And the colonization that we see around the world, the colonization of Australia, the American War of Independence, and possibly even continuing on to the American Civil War, which happened generally over that same 100 to 200 year period. All of these wars, I would suggest, are cover stories to hide the overthrow of the Tartarian civilization. And I think that it's still ongoing. We're doing it now. All the wars that are being fought now are to continue to wipe out the last traces of this civilization. And the police that we have here and these legal systems that we have here, this is just a prison system, folks, and all the police are prison guards. Even the fact that you can't defend yourself. I mean, if you escalate the level and if you do this and if you do that. Here in Australia, if you defend yourself in any way without calling the police, you've committed a crime. How does that work? The police will tell you that if you pick up a stick to defend yourself against a man, well, you've escalated the conflict, therefore you have just become the aggressor. But what if the guy that is attacking you is 3 times the size of you, some steroid android fruitcake who's coming and monstering you, and you are not able to pick up anything to defend yourself? You have to call the police, and if you call the police will say, well, no crime's actually been committed yet, so you need to call us after the crime's been committed. So in other words, let him kill you and then call us after he's killed you and we'll go and arrest him. That's how it works in this country. This sort of stuff is absurd, folks. And it's all done to disempower people, to take people's sense of self-worth away, to make people incapable of defending themselves and turn them into easy targets for the system. And the system knows exactly what it's doing, folks, and I would also suggest that the system is in possession of technology that we do not know about. Technology they've always had. I think the technology we're using now is technology that they have always had. It's always been there. It's reversed to the type of technology we should be using. We should be using free energy, ethereal type of technology, all of the stuff which did exist and continued to exist up until about the mid-1800s, and not the sort of technology we're using now, but we're being set up. And you've got to wonder how it's done, whether it's an earthly thing, whether the whole earth is a machine that they use to do this. And who they are is another good question. Another interesting thing that I've seen on another channel is a report about how the oceans are receding. There's a lot of places around the world that are drying up. The oceans are not rising, as we're being told, global warming, melting of the ice caps, the raising of the water levels, all this sort of stuff. Well, it actually appears to be going the other way. Ocean levels appear to be declining all around the world. And not just some places around the world, but there's reports coming from virtually all over the world. And again, in looking at this information, try to put your beliefs of whether you believe the Earth is flat or a globe aside and just look at the information. It doesn't matter what the shape is, okay? We're talking about oceans here, not shape. Because the guy doing the research uses the word globe, there's no point in attacking him if you believe something else. There's a bigger picture. Focus. One person has even suggested that the oceans are leaking through the crust into the Earth, and that perhaps there's a lower ocean that exists below this ocean, another ocean that exists beneath the surface of the Earth. And sometimes that may bubble up and cause floods. Maybe it recedes before it does that, the way a tidal wave goes. Maybe it's all part of the whole mud flood technology. Maybe it's done electromagnetically. Maybe they drain the water out to do something else with it. Who knows?